Hi there, I'm Anna Richards, Bright Flag's head of community, and I am here with an incredible panel of women to talk today about community, career progression, and what that means to each of us in the scope of legal operations. So I'm going to go around to my very impressive panel and let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Ashley Adams. I have my doctorate degree in leadership and organizational culture. I've spent the majority of my career between HR and legal. Currently, I work for Contentful as the director of legal operations, and not in my title, but I do as chief of staff work as well. And we can talk a little bit about that as a part of this conversation. And yeah, I'll kick it back to you, Anna.
Great, thanks, Dr. Ashley Adams. Excuse me. We should absolutely get that in there. Sandy, would you go next?
Sure, yeah. I'm Sandy McDonnell. I've been in legal operations for much of my career, actually, minus several years over in product marketing. So I bring some interesting product marketing experience, but most of the rest of my career has been in the legal operations space. Today, I am the senior director and head of legal operations at DocuSign, where my team does, kind of all traditional legal operations functions, although I also spend a lot of time with our sales and marketing and product teams helping to build better products that meet the needs of our legal audience.
Amazing. Susan, would you round us out?
Sure, Susan Packall. I am head of global legal operations and chief of staff at Avalara. I have about 20 years in the space, typically hired to build a legal ops function for the first time or rebuild it, and located out of Reno, Nevada.
Great. Thanks, guys. So, amazing group of folks here. Really excited to talk to you guys. Want to share with our audience and just kind of reground us for this discussion in sort of the why we're here. So, my background is also legal operations and technology, about 20 years at high growth SaaS companies as well as Fortune 500s, leading legal operations teams. And so, I think all of us here can say pretty confidently we've had a pretty successful run at our careers thus far. I think we've all been also very vocal and visible, which has been something I think has been key to success, which we'll talk more about. But the reason that I pulled us all together today, and thank you all again for being willing to speak with us, we're looking at the results of the Bright Flag Annual Compensation Survey for 2026. And as those numbers are coming in, we're noticing some things that continue to be problematic in terms of gender pay gap, and wanted to share just a couple pieces of data before we get into the actual conversation. So, as you can see on this first slide, our industry is majority female. And take this all with a bit of a grain of salt, guys. This is self-reported data coming in on the Bright Flag survey, but I think this is a pretty good gut check in terms of what we're seeing anecdotally and based on, our colleagues as we look across the room. This is what I see as well. So, given this makeup, the next slide is what really got my attention here. This has been a sticking point for the last several years in the Bright Flag survey. So you're seeing, although women make up the majority of our industry, women are earning about 83 cents on the dollar, kind of generally. And that goes down as you go up in seniority. So for leading functions, that goes down to about 76 cents. This number, give or take a couple cents for each of these, has been about the same for the last 3 or so years. So really no movement happening despite the amount of female power that we're seeing kind of accumulate in this space. And so with that, I think that the question becomes good to know. What do we do about this? Do we as an industry care? How do we take care of each other through it? Why might this be happening? I think one of the things that each of us has encountered is a bit of an education gap that we have with the various companies that we end up at. So where does legal operations sit? It's not new, but it's new-ish, right? Maybe 20-ish years that it's been kind of in the vernacular. But as we think about reporting lines. I know I have been aligned to IT. I've been aligned to various like HR roles. I have been put in with lawyers. So just thinking about career architecture and helping the business understand the value of what we do, maybe gender even aside on the pay gap, just understanding, what is it that we're kind of here to do in an organization? And I think this is a common topic, is how do you make that clear as you're coming into a new like head of ops role, or you're a army of one, or even somewhere that's established and you've been aligned in a big organization to a career architecture where you don't quite fit. I'm curious as to the panel's experience with this. I think everybody has some. Ashley, maybe I could call on you. I know that you've actually built career architecture and had a lot of thinking around frameworks. I'm curious as to your thoughts on why it's set up like this, how we might tackle it.
It's interesting because a lot of times it's a system and it's a forcing function of the system, whether it be Workday or some other, Radford, whatever system, the company might be using. And it's a forcing function for legal ops. It's also a forcing function for legal, and we can talk a little bit about that too. But as part of the work that I've done both at Nissan and Asurion and now Contentful and redesigning career architecture is taking the opportunity to educate my partners in HR who may not know what legal ops is or even fully understand what legal, our attorneys do. And when I'm building out those frameworks, I'm really mindful of not only, market data for compensation, but also like being clear about what the role is. And so that there is clear progression, not only for legal ops, but, for my attorneys. And most of the time it does start with the attorney track. But if you're doing it for the attorneys, use it as the opportunity to do it for legal operations, for compliance, for our equity, folks that sit in this space as well. I mean, they need career pathing too. And so what we ended up doing at Contentful is we created a new job family. And so that really helped in setting legal operations apart, not only from the attorney track, but also the other tracks that sit within legal, such as contracts management or paralegal roles. And coming armed with the compensation data and other things that sit in the market when you're starting to have these conversations with, your compensation partners or benefits partners or whoever it might be within the HR space. Speaking their language helps too.
Yeah, I mean, do you offer your services for hire? I feel like we should send you out.
I need her career frameworks. Yeah.
Yeah,
Short answer is yes. Please reach out. I'll happily advise.
fantastic. Thank you. Sandy, Susan, how about you guys?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the challenges has been that in a legal department, there are both, you know, legal professionals who are non-attorneys and legal professionals who are attorneys. And so when I've worked with HR teams in this role or in previous roles, a lot of times it's been very focused on the attorney role and kind of what does that career progression look like in the attorney role. And so one of the things that we did at DocuSign several years ago now, but is develop an entire separate career framework for legal
Mhm.
operations, everything from a legal operations specialist all the way up to that kind of senior director role where I am today, so that we have really clear kind of what the expectations are for each one of those steps. And that gives the folks on my team and on, in the future, and a sense of like what are the expectations at each of those levels. And we did the same thing kind of to what Ashley said for our compliance team as well. Another set of like largely non-attorney professionals, who,
Mhm.
if you don't kind of give them that clear progression, they're not sure. Are they project managers, program managers? Are they more similar to some other product compliance function? Who knows? And so really just, yeah, using the framework that our HR team likes, putting it in their words, as Ashley said, but then making really specific ones for the operations function, I found to be really helpful and give my team that kind of clear path to where they can grow, how they can continue to develop. And I've even seen this change over the last 10 or so years. I've been in legal operations for well over a decade now, but I was, I typically had like project managers, like IT project manager kind of job families. And
Yeah.
today it's more recognized as a true function, which I think is amazing, right? We've come a long way. We're not all the way there yet. But I've definitely seen that change over the 10, 15 plus years, as I'm sure Susan has as well, since she's been in the industry a little bit longer than even I have.
I totally agree with what you both have said. I think just a shifting a little bit to, when it doesn't work for you, you don't have the business case to change the job architecture. Some companies just aren't that progressive. They're not large enough. They don't view it as enough of a priority, which is a shame because I agree with that approach. But I think the other part that's really important is once you're in role, is aligning yourself with the right level roles elsewhere in the company. And I've found that we have kindred spirits in finance ops, in people ops, in biz ops, head of program management, all of these AI transformation teams. We just have so much in common with them. And by kind of aligning with them as early on as you can in your role, also gives some reference point for other decision makers who are viewing your role in the context of the larger business. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but I think aligning yourself with the right folk across the organization is really critical as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point. I mean, you want not just your kind of direct line champions, but the breadth of that should have sort of no bounds. It's really always helpful, especially as you're finding those kind of like roles. Let's talk a little bit about, I think ops proper is one thing, but operations and legal operations in particular is a unique space in that we straddle a lot of different disciplines. I know, Susan, you were going to mention some learnings around the chief of staff efforts, which is something that we've seen show up more and more in senior legal operations roles and spaces. How do you navigate something like that? I mean, architecture, but kind of maybe beyond that.
Sure. I think it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a mandated career path for everyone. There are some folks that just don't have the desire to expand into that area. I think
Hmm.
where I've seen the role be really successful is once you've reached a level in your operations career where the GC, CLO, whoever you're reporting to in that within the legal team starts viewing you as someone they want to pull more into strategic decision making. And I think the key for kind of morphing into a chief of staff role is the trust built that you're now brought into part of the decision making versus executing because of decisions that were made. And I think that is a sometimes a natural evolution for someone in a role who's had their hands across the job architecture, the AI strategy, the tech, general tech strategy, outside counsel management, all of these really key components gives you this breadth and view across the organization that really not many other roles in the legal team have. So it's a natural progression to go to that chief of staff for people who are interested in that path. And I think I've had roles where they were combined, as in this role, and I believe also at eBay. But in some roles I've had, it has been split, and there just hasn't been a desire to invest in the chief of staff. And I think you still see that now, but I do believe it's becoming more common.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's to
Sandra,
me, it's
Ashley.
like the de facto, like I'm not, I guess my, chief of staff isn't in my title, but that is a big chunk of the
You're
job that I
doing it.
do,
Same.
right? So
Yeah.
that happens too, right? Where I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not in there, but it is a huge part of my role, right? I would say I got there by just showing up and doing the job.
Mm.
I asked to have a seat at the leadership table well before I reported directly to the CLO. It's like, I need to be in these meetings. I need to be sitting with your staff. I started driving like the strategy for the team before it was ever asked of me. And so part of it is just I just did the job
Mm.
rather than waiting for someone to like bestow that title on me and then start kind of stepping into it. But agreed, it can be kind of two separate functions. Ops sometimes sits elsewhere. I've seen, it might sit on the commercial legal team, for example, because a lot of the initial work is around contracting. So they can be separate roles, but I think for all of us right now, it's kind of that one combo
Hmm.
role.
I just
Yeah.
add, I think everyone should take a note from Sandy's book. I think I've seen some interesting research, like from McKinsey, that males will much more readily promote themselves and ask for that seat at that table or ask for a change in title more than women. It's just proven. And I think, Sandy, your approach where you were just straight up asking for it and assuming that that was something that was, a logical progression for you was clearly understood by your leadership. And I just think that maybe back to the survey, spicy question is, maybe we collectively are not being bold enough and vocal enough to just basically say that should be part of my role. I want to call it out, or I should be reporting to this person, and here's why. maybe that's
I
spicy, but
love this. Susan's the queen of spicy questions. If you guys haven't caught on, I mean, she just this is one of my favorite parts about conversations with Susan. I would like to pull this apart a little bit because I think that there's a lot here. I think that there's a lot we could talk about in terms of ought chief of staff and head of ops be the same person. I think there's an argument to be that they're big enough to be split. I also think that for my personal journey, it sounds like everybody else here, you're either doing it or have it officially titled, and that has been to the benefit of your career and earning potential. I have had that experience myself. I think that this idea of just doing the job as you see the opportunity is a really important one to talk about. I think, what I'd like the group to maybe comment on is, there's an advantage you get from jumping in, showing your capability, learning on the job, becoming the person that people think of when they think of the, strategic efforts or, these like large scale transformation things or like kind of conduit into the general counsel or CLO or the person who is like the real kind of like owner behind the scenes. So there's all of this power that comes with it. And then if that is not coupled, Susan, as you were saying, and Sandy, also like with this very vocal, request for acknowledgement and some sort of seat at the table, some sort of getting in behind the scenes that comes with that, it really can be a space where you put in a lot of effort without a lot of payoff. I think that this idea that you work really hard in the hopes of being noticed is a little bit dangerous. And I
100%.
also think that there is an art to asking for the things without being like, I've been doing it, I deserve it. Like, I don't know that that's necessarily the way that you go in, like hard charging, although maybe in some cases there's a lot here. So I would love the group to maybe talk about some of those nuances a bit because I think there's probably a lot of people out there who are already doing be above and beyond their job descriptions, acting in the way that they want to be recognized as more officially in future, or maybe this is a push to do so. But then how do you approach that? How do you ask for the next steps, for the reporting lines, for the compensation, for the title change, for the promotion? What are the group's thoughts? Maybe I'll go around and Ashley, maybe you can start.
I think you have to have your data ready.
Yeah.
You've got to come in armed, and you've got to show the results and know your audience too. If your GC or your CLO or whoever it is that you might be, reporting into is not a data person, then you've got to speak whatever language it is that's going to get their attention.
Hmm.
If they are a data person, then you bring in the results, you bring in the data, and you demonstrate, hey, I've been doing, these things, and here's how. And what's interesting about promotions is there's always a lag, and that's a known factor. There's the lagging indicator that we talk about, but sometimes, and we've all seen this, things happen off cycle. And so being, knowing your audience and getting others to, we talk about this cross-functional element to our role, get others to advocate for you. There have been many times where I've not had to say anything because somebody else is championing for me in a different part of the org to my leader or to that person's leader. And word travels fast because
Allies.
allies,
Hmm.
you got to build your allies. And that's really helped me in my career is to have others, sometimes do a little bit of the work for me. And there's no harm in that. But then
Mm-mm.
you also have to have the courage to have the conversation. Like be brave enough to accept whatever comes back from the person that you're delivering it to. Like I've had some recent hard conversations about my own career, and I've been brave enough to take whatever is going to come back from my leader, whatever she says to me, and have that open dialogue and not be afraid to let the chips where they fall. Because
Hmm.
I know we're gonna talk about this, but sometimes it's okay to walk away if
Hmm. Hmm.
it's not serving you.
Yeah, and I love this framing of bravery. It really is, right? Like it's much easier to sort of stay the course and sort of like hope. I would also maybe call out that, at least for me, the next step need not be the final
Yeah.
big bang, right? Like we're just looking for the right next step.
Yep.
And it might, and we've all done, and like I'm gonna quote David Cowan, like your career is a jungle gym. Like it could be I've gone from like head ofs to individual contributor
Mhm.
to like different like and it's like so many factors start coming in as you start getting a little more senior in your career and seeing like what resonates and where you want to go. But on that point around finding your champions, I know, Sandy, this is something you actually work with your team on, right? Like it's building that internal influence and also something that you as a leader are helping to champion for your group. Can you talk a bit about that as like both a model of like I think what everybody should be doing and also to maybe spark some ideas on how folks can approach this?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of years ago, I had this kind of motto for the year, and it was just ask. And it was because, for me, what I realized was the worst thing that could happen is someone says no, but that was already the answer if you didn't ask. And so you
Mm,
were kind of back in the same place that you already were. And so if you are brave and you show up like Ashley and you ask for that seat at the table, you ask for the promotion, you ask for the new project, and they say no, like, well, you're right back where you started, right? So that's really the worst thing that can happen. And when I put that, kind of mindset in place, I was like, oh, okay, well then I better just ask, right? So I just want to echo that I love that approach and being brave and showing up, asking the question. But yeah, to the question you just kind of asked, Anna, which is all around, marketing yourself and helping my team also market themselves. And that's really all about how do you build those champions, those people that are going to go to bat for you and say like, yes, Sandy needs that promotion. Yes, we should put her on that big project. Yes, we can trust her to do this thing. Is all about having other people do it for you or echo what you've been saying. And so and a lot of it's just about communication. Like, how do you make sure that, your boss and your boss's boss and your peers, how do you make sure they know what you're working on, right? If you do something really cool and then you never share it, it's like the tree that fell in the forest and nobody heard it, right? Like there's all kinds of amazing projects and work that we do, but if we don't share the impact, no one ever knows. So we've been talking a lot in my team about how do you better share that impact? And sometimes it's just, hey, can you draft up an email of that cool project you're working on so I can forward it to like everybody I know, you know?
mhm,
Or maybe it's, go talk to your cross-functional partner and build that really good relationship. And then, maybe I'm going to get an email from them about how amazing you were that you helped on that project. So it's really building those champions, those allies, those sponsors, whatever you want to call them. But thinking about how we all market ourselves. And to Susan's point, like I don't think that women do it as well as men do. I think men
mhm,
walk into the room saying like, "I'm the best, and here's why." And I don't think that we all do that. And so it's really just about communication, about sharing the amazing work, about building those cross-functional relationships, and with the right people too. Again, to Susan's point about if you want to be at that next level, who are your peers? Are the
mhm,
people that you're working with the people at that level? And then
mhm.
if not, how can you start working with those people? Because that you need those people to champion you. At least I know in our process, which, bigger company, very formal process, but, if to get me to this promotion, I had to have VPs and senior directors vouching for me, right? So if I didn't know any VPs and senior directors, there would have been nobody to vouch for me. So that's kind of my thoughts on the, building those champions, marketing yourself. And you can do it internally in your company, you can do it on LinkedIn, right? Like LinkedIn is such a powerful tool. And it doesn't have to be all about bragging about you. Just share really interesting things that you've learned, you've read about. Maybe you are sharing about a project that you've worked on, but that's another way to build your influence also outside the company, which can be
Mhm.
hugely impactful.
And that's exactly what I wanted to maybe touch on next is I think we've gotten some really good perspective on internally finding your champions, finding your advocates, building your allies. I think there's also this huge opportunity within the legal operations industry, like writ large. And I think it's something that a lot of folks leave on the table. I think I've been fairly like guilty of that in some ways, stepping into this new role, having to be like, frankly very vulnerable
Your
and
job now.
posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Ooh, and it's a
you're out
muscle.
there.
And like it's such a I think all of us are here and have invested our careers in this space because we get so much out of it. I have never seen an industry more kind of excited about each other, more willing to share, more willing to champion, more willing. And I think when we were prepping for this, each of you had examples of folks who'd reached out cold and you were willing to mentor or are working with, or there's some connection that way. I will say my own anecdotal like research for this like session. I scrolling through my LinkedIn, look, I'll refer you back to that first slide I shared. Like, we are overwhelmingly female. And do you know who I'm mostly seeing vocal and visible on LinkedIn are our male counterparts, which love that. Continue it, guys. And I think that there's a lot of space for the women in our space to be more visible, more vocal. And I think it probably has something to do, at least for me, feeling a bit unworthy on something to be posting because who am I? What am I doing? Everybody's doing cool stuff. Like, why does anybody care? And I think it's this real kind of in service of knowledge and connection versus it being you must have the most important thing. But maybe Susan, you can talk about your experience because you've been incredibly successful about building community internally and externally across the course of your career thus far. And it's something, I think when I first met you, I was like, I've been fangirling you for like years and like we've never had a chance to meet, but I knew of you and the things that you were doing because you had been visible and had taken opportunities to do so. So maybe you can share some of your learnings and experience with that.
Happy to. Could I just drop a spicy nugget back on some
Yeah,
things you were just talking about? Just
please.
taking us back. I digress for a second, but I think I think we have to understand the playground that we're in, right? And particularly in the context of your data, I'm just like it's female dominated, but we are not paid the same as men doing the same roles. And I think that the research will show, HBR did a great analysis of this, that men are promoted on potential and women are promoted on execution. And so
Mm,
if we know that context and where we're working, it really does mean that the numbers and the story we tell about the results in leading these functions is critical and more critical for us than it is for them. Not to be us versus them, but just looking at the data for a moment. And
yeah.
so having been in SaaS for so long, and I know this is the case in non-SaaS companies too, but even the CLOs are talking much more now about impact. So they're talking about how do I show the impact of legal on the org? And then you need to be showing the impact of legal ops. And while I think like building the internal community, I think I mentioned like these other ops teams that are like kindred spirits, that's great. But I have actually seen people who are wonderful at building community, internal and external, but they're terrible at showing the impact in actual data and where the team really moved the needle for the business. And I think that like that's a tough ask, right? If you're in a role, an ops role where it's very difficult for you to find ways to show your impact in the business, like that's a big question, right? And I know we'll talk more about what happens if you get into that space or your leadership isn't ready to consider that. But I just wanted to drive home that point of that it's more important for us to share our impact and the stories that we tell than our male colleagues.
I love that, and that is such an important point. And I love the framing around the potential versus execution, and that being the grounding in the data. So thank you for raising that. I think that's really beautifully said and made. Um, maybe with that, we've sort of covered this. We have a responsibility to sort of ground ourselves within an architecture where we can speak the business of the language. We have people resources internally, externally. We have data to gather to show and kind of support each other on this. And even yet, I think there's a conversation to be had about sometimes a fit is not a fit, and you can do everything that you want to do and push and raise your hand and play the game, for lack of a better term, and you still come up against this ceiling. I know for a fact every woman on this call has had that experience where you've had to walk away from something that you hoped would be different than it ended up being, but for your own development, for your own ability to kind of continue to grow, it needed to change. And I think that that's a hard message for folks to hear. It's really scary to leave the known. It's really difficult to decide that you want and deserve more. And I'd love to maybe talk about why this is an important conversation. And Susan, I'm going to start with you too, because when we were prepping for this, you brought this up first as advice that you do offer to mentees. And it was something that all of us then emphatically nodded to, but I don't think it's talked about a ton. So could you maybe kick us off on this
Yeah.
topic?
I think I've known lots of people, and myself included, where you are doing all of the right things, but for whatever reason, the business environment you're in, the leader that you have, they're not ready for that next level. And you can, certainly we can all be doing better, and certainly we can try to show the numbers and impact and hope that's enough. But sometimes it's not enough. And I think my vulnerability story is, over a decade ago, I was working for a chief legal officer who I was just ready for that chief of staff role. And I just said flat out, I asked, Sandy, I went in and I asked, and I was already, doing ops for this person. And she sat me down behind closed doors and she said, Susan, I got to tell you, you're horrible with numbers. You're just terrible with numbers. And I just can't turn over my entire operating budget, and this was a Fortune 500 company at the time, I can't turn that over until that's something that, you really demonstrate for me. And when I then realized that I still had a ways to go to get that title there, and for many other reasons, it was still the right move for me to shift. I did and I do share this story with other folks is that if you can't speak in terms of the business, which is knowing the numbers, knowing how the company, generates revenue, following at that level, it's very hard for leadership to like invest in you at the highest level. So people that I talk to, they're like, Susan, I'm doing this, and I'm performing, and I'm doing all the right. My reviews are stellar. It's just after you hear that for a little bit of time, and people love longevity. They love having that tenure at their organizations, but having to say, it may be time for you to walk because you will walk into your next role with almost instant credibility at that level,
Yep.
whereas you're fighting to get that level where you are. And I have found in my career, I just had to do that several times to get to the level, and then you can like blossom and grow and expand there. But sometimes that blossoming is just not going to happen in the current garden that you're living in.
Yeah. Yeah. Ashley, maybe you can take that next. And especially given the lens that you have to view this through, I'm curious as to your experience and thoughts.
I wouldn't be sitting here with the three of you today if I had not taken a risk and been brave enough to walk away from an 8-year career at Nissan. I was in a role that I liked, but I knew deep down that I couldn't move fast in a slow-moving organization. And so, that's actually how I ended up in legal ops, to be honest with you, because I took that risk. So I'm happy that I did. And, I think I was honest with myself, knowing that I had to go backwards to go forwards. And sometimes it's not about title. Sometimes it's not even about compensation, because when you know in your heart and you believe in yourself enough, you will continue to put yourself out there and ask those questions and ask for the next thing and keep moving yourself along. And so that's, a lot of what I've done. And then when I left, Assurian to come to Contentful, it was for the opportunity to build, because I wanted to build and I hadn't been able to do that in a way that I felt would honor, what I wanted in my career. And I wanted to work directly for a chief legal officer. So those were my two goals that I was able to do here at Contentful. And again, had I not walked away, I wouldn't be sitting here with you.
Sandy, how
It's
about
amazing.
you? Yeah, it is amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. Sorry.
I'm just so inspired by all these stories. I'm like, huh, what should I go do
I
next?
know.
That's great.
I love it.
I love it. I think back to my product marketing days, right? Which when I took a scenic detour, and it was very intentional. I wanted to try something other than legal operations. And I really quickly learned it was not for me, but it was really challenging because I had several managers. My managers just didn't support my growth, right? They didn't see anything more for me in that role. And I quickly realized I didn't see anything more for myself in that role. But if I hadn't done that, and kind of to Ashley's point about taking a risk and trying something new, if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would be in the role that I am in today, because my role today is a really interesting combination of a lot of ops, a lot of chief of staff, and also I spend a lot of time with our sales and marketing teams. And so if I hadn't done that role, as painful as it was, or as poorly suited as I was for that function, I wouldn't be in this role today where I get to wear kind of these couple of different hats. But it is really important to know when an organization isn't the right fit or whether sometimes there just isn't that role at that company, right? It might not exist. It might there might be somebody else in it, right? There's, we talk about it and it's legal teams are small. There's one of me. There aren't three of me. And so, to some extent, you have to wait for that right kind of business need and fit. And if it's not at the company that you're at, or you don't think that there's an opportunity to continue to grow your skills, it's not all about getting that next kind of promotion. There's also an opportunity to like really grow your skills in your current role, whether you want to use that jungle gym metaphor, or like I made a bingo card the other day for our team for like all the different kinds of things that you could do that aren't, kind of day job things.
I
But
love
you can
that.
think about like building those skills in more of like a horizontal kind of fashion. But if you're in a role where there's no opportunity to build the horizontal skills and there's no opportunity to move vertically, then to Susan's point, that is a time to leave and get out of there. So that's what I would offer.
Yeah, that's
Just
such
want
a
to add,
great,
can I add one thing
yeah,
to that?
please.
I also think you will, for those of you who are perhaps looking for that next role, I have found that you will get to a point in your career where you have some non-negotiables. And at a point in my career, my non-negotiable was not, was reporting to the GC or the CLO. And I had done enough of reporting to other functions and knew what I needed and wanted. And I wanted to just highlight that the best job I ever had in my career was when I walked in with my little black book and on it were all of the things that they had to say yes to or, validate was occurring in their organization or the way the organization was thinking about things. And if like one or two of those weren't there, I was going to walk. I was just going to walk because I knew I would find the next role, and I kept doing that. And when I found that organization, it was the best role I ever had because it was aligned with my values, everything I expected. And I wasn't walking in the door knowing that I was going to have to fight for that like legitimacy of our function. And just talking to people in the community, I know a lot of you are still doing that. You're still out there fighting to justify the value and the impact that an operations team can bring to legal.
Hmm. I mean, that's incredible self-efficacy to be so strong in what your non-negotiables were and look at what the payoff of that is. I mean, I really think that that speaks to sort of the forward motion that we should be employing as we're looking. It is an active crafting, right? Our careers, a lot of it
Yes.
feels like it's this, you're sort of in the river and along for the ride. And some of it is about, being open to the opportunity. And some of it is really intentionally like, what is working? What is not working? What do I want? What do I need in order to feel valued and seen and set up for success? Because, we spend so much time here. We should enjoy it. We're coming to the sort of end of our time together. I wanted to do a quick sort of roundtable on best pieces of career advice you've ever received. Susan, would you mind kicking us off on that? We'll go around, I'll call on folks
Sure.
from there.
Well, I have to tell you the other half of the you're terrible at numbers story.
Oh,
When
good.
I was told I was terrible at numbers, I decided that that just wasn't going to be me. And it was a big wake-up call to how I was going to have future success in my role. So I took, classes at night in, accruals management and just, general how to read a P&L and just really going more in depth into, again, what we were saying is the language of the business. And it took probably a couple of months. And when I then was given responsibility over the operating budget, we beat budget every month after I took on the role because I knew what to look for and knew what to do. And the stars aligned. So the hardest piece of information I ever received or criticism was that point, but I credit that CLO for actually respecting me enough to tell me that and raise that to my awareness because then I knuckled down on it and I nailed it. But I coach my legal ops teams nowadays is don't forget to learn the numbers. You can be in your niche role within operations, but if you cannot expand out to understand the numbers and get your feet wet with the operating budget as best you can, you're missing in my view, you're missing a key component to be successful at the senior levels in this role.
Oh, I love it. Don't give the girl a challenge. She'll come for you. I love that story. Amazing. Sandy, how about you?
Yeah, I love that one. It's such a good story. I think for me, one of the best pieces of advice that I've been given, and this was actually fairly recently. I have a mentor here at DocuSign, but he told me understand what your manager's goals are. Like what are they being measured on, right? So what does their boss care about what they do? And if you can help your manager deliver on that, then you will have great success, right? So that has really helped me. Like, and it to me, in my role, it is for us, it's understanding our business and how the legal team can drive more business for DocuSign. And we're in a unique kind of role. Not everyone in a legal department has as much kind of direct impact on our revenue. But if you can understand how your CLO, how your manager is being measured, and you can contribute to that success, I think it helps wildly. It certainly helps me wildly in my career. It's just recent advice, and that's why it's with me. But yeah, understand what your boss is getting measured on, deliver on that. How can you help them? That'll help you grow.
That's awesome. Yeah, that reframing of effort and kind of that refocusing and kind of this forcing function to level up the view, right? Like we talk a lot about getting beyond your department. We're thinking now and we're forced to and in the unique position to be able to think enterprise level. And that's really what that is demonstrating, which I think is why we have the opportunities we do to work so cross-functionally and sit at such an influential space. So
Yeah, like put your
thank you.
CEO hat on, right? Like what
Yeah,
does, in my case, it's like, what does the CEO really care about? Because that's what the CLO cares about. Therefore, that's what I care about, right? So really
yeah.
putting that like CEO mindset on and understanding the business, to Susan's point, being able to speak that language as well, will really help anyone at any level, I think, up level their career.
Yeah.
100%.
Awesome. Ashley.
So, very similar to Susan, I got told to be more assertive by one of my leaders,
Hmm.
and that changed my entire trajectory, like those
Wow.
words. And so, kind of coupled with that, one of my early leaders told me, Ashley, if somebody taps you on the shoulder to take a role, even if that role is a stretch and you might not be a fit, you need to say yes because you're going to learn and you're going to grow and it's going to be painful, but you're going to come out better on the other side. And so I have always kept that with me. Like, it's okay. Like, that's how I ended up in legal ops. That's how I ended up in procurement for a couple of years. Like I was not
It's a
afraid.
windy path.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a windy path, and it's okay to say yes, even if you know you're not the perfect fit. Do it anyway. And so, like, take the risk.
Ooh, I love it. I get goosebumps. I mean, I think just to give my perspective on this, it's truly about like be open to the
Mhm.
opportunities that come your way. Like
Yep.
do what you think you want to do, but keep listening because things that you don't expect will present themselves. I think, we've talked about the windy road that can be the legal operations journey and this entire ecosystem that we are a part of. And for myself, having sat in, project management, I was in e-discovery for 10 years first. I moved into like leading teams. I left ops to go and figure out what this AI startup world was about. And all of a sudden, this head of community role, which is my dream job, becomes available. These things that you don't necessarily even know you can want, present themselves through the connections that you are able to kind of these dots you can put together through the connections you have with the people as well as the expertise that you pick up along the way. So back to that, like think about the breadth of skills you can pull in, think about how your bosses are looking at things, learn these, become the expert in these places that are business language, numbers, and then be willing to take risks. It's just this beautiful kind of amalgamation of things that lead us to where we are all now sitting. And I'm just so grateful for you all being part of this conversation and sharing your thoughts. It's really been beautiful to hear from you. And I have learned a lot. I'm leaving feeling very inspired.